of course, we added a section to the Jewish text, but we didn't change the Jewish text. Islam revised the entire Jewish narrative and went from Isaac to Ishmael. And as time went on, both became very critical of their parent religions. Many Muslims thus consider Muhammad to be the restorer of the uncorrupted monotheistic faith and taught that Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, and Jesus, and other prophets were really Muslims, which is still the viewpoint. And then we get up to the, somebody has something to say? Okay. In the 12th century of the Christian era, the Crusades get going. We've got the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, and ninth. Well, there was a ninth actually, but anyway, the Crusades go on between the 12th century and the 15th century. And we have the Rhineland massacres. Now things are growing in Europe, and the German Crusades of 1096 happened during the First Crusade. The Crusaders were likely motivated by their need for money. Many Crusaders had to go into debt in order to purchase weapons and equipment for the expedition. And as Western Catholicism strictly forbade usury, the idea of making money by loaning money. And many Crusaders found themselves in deep debt to the Jewish moneylenders because they had to buy all these weapons to go take over the Ottoman Turks. And having armed themselves by assuming large debts, the Crusaders rationalized that the killing of Jewish moneylenders was okay because they themselves were going on an important Catholic Christian mission. So we see here locations, Speyer, Worms, Metz, different places in French and German areas where the Crusaders came from. Saladin, one of the early leaders of the Muslim world, was actually living in the area up in northern Israel at the time. And he defeated the Crusaders in a big battle at the Horns of Hattin, which we see the Sea of Galilee up there, and the Horns of Hattin are just a little bit to the west of that. So that's where that battle happened in the 11th century. That's fairly early. Here come the Ottomans. And the Ottomans are important because they rule there from, 1299, that's 1300, up until the end of World War I. That's 600 years, give or take. Initially a small Turkoman territory during Osman's lifetime that's what they had to begin with in the early Ottoman period, but they grew enormously. Here we have Osman. He's the original founder of the Ottoman Empire, but at that time it was not very impressive, but it definitely grew. And it existed in various locations until shortly after the end of World War I. And that's something I think people don't realize, and that's, again, it's so important to know this has gone on for a long time. And this didn't just happen when Israel became a modern state. And that's what we have to get clear in our minds if we're going to teach our kids, because they're not being taught wisely in school. And here, there's a whole map series that I have shown, but we don't have time for that today. But basically, we're into now the 1600s, and the Ottoman Empire is growing. And it grew during the Crusades. And in 1516, Jerusalem was overtaken by the Ottoman Empire.
Joanne, isn't that also considered or called the Turkish Empire?
Yeah, well, it's the Ottoman Turks.
Yeah.
But the Turkey we know today is a fairly big country, but it had little areas, so the Ottoman Turks lived in different places. So that's why it's hard to say, well, the Ottoman Turks are this big unit who control everything, because they moved around in that 600-year period. But but today's Turkey is the modern group. And these people enjoyed a period, well, the Jews actually had some free time during Suleiman the Magnificent. And he was really the most effective leader in the Ottoman area. And he's the one who built the walls of Jerusalem. When we go to Jerusalem now and we go into the old city, and the walls have been damaged and rebuilt several times, but he's the one in the 1500s who started that. And of course, we've got all the Muslim things on the Temple Mount now. Preaching of the First Crusade inspired an outbreak of anti-Jewish violence. In parts of Germany and France, Jews were perceived as being just as much of an enemy as the Muslims. They were held responsible for the crucifixion of Jesus, and they were more immediately visible than the distant Muslims. The Muslims who were ruling were living in other places, so that was why it kind of, but the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which we're seeing there with the two big round roofs, was built by Constantine in the 3rd century, and we go into that building today. And so the Crusades continue. The European Christians fought to retake Jerusalem from the Seljuk Turks. Up in the top there we see these uniforms people were forced to wear. The Jews were forced to wear distinctive dress and live in restricted areas, and they always had to wear these pointed hats, and then they had to wear a Star of David. Star of David is a badge of shame, and the pointed hat was required in many European areas. And the burning of the Talmud and the other Jewish writings in the 12th century, this is just growing. Here's Suleiman the Magnificent. He was the most successful and the longest reigning Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, 1520 to 1566. Under his administration, the Ottoman Empire ruled over at least 25 million people. But was there a comment somebody had?
They like his hat.
And how strong is
You're trying to make a serious presentation, and they're laughing at
There's
his
jokes
hat.
on every slide.
We're listening, Joanne.
Yeah.
We're listening.
Yeah, wouldn't you like a hat like that? I think we should, it might be good for Presbyterians. So here's another map. You kind of have to be looking at the map to understand any of this, but we've got the Ottoman Empire is really getting strong in the 1400s. And lands were added between the 14 and 1500s, and we see the green area was where the Ottoman Empire started, and then it grew, and we see all of the purple areas, and we see now Jerusalem is under the purple area, and that is, now the Ottomans probably weren't hanging out there, but they were in charge. And today, the Palestinians today really think that the Palestinians had always ruled there, and that isn't true. The maps over here were from the early biblical period, but the question has to be asked, were the early people who lived there Canaanites? Yeah, many of them were. Were they connected to the ancient Philistines? Yeah, they were there too. There was a geographical area called Palestine, off and on, but never a people group called Palestinians until very recently, probably the beginning of the 1900s. The Philistines ceased to exist along with the other cultures of that time. All of those people who are mentioned in the Bible, we've got all these little groups that show up here and there, but the Jews are the only ones who are still around today. This goes back to the early days of the Bible, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and so forth. So those areas and the people, we don't know what happened to those people, but to say that all of those people were the ones who ruled Israel forever and ever is not true. But that the first time I went to Israel in 78, we had an Israeli guide who had lived with the Arabs, and he spoke Arabic and Hebrew and English very well. And he brought along a school book that had just been printed by the Palestinians for their schools. And he read to us from that school book, and he said, these kids are being told that they have ruled here since the beginning of the Bible times, that the Turks and the Arabs are the original people, and the Jews just showed up recently. And he said that's what they've been taught ever since Israel became a state. So that there is confusion is definitely no surprise. While we often hear that the modern Palestinians are the descendants of the Canaanites, the Jebusites, and or the Philistines, no historical, anthropological, or sociological evidence for those ideas exist. There's considerable uncertainty about the ethnicity of the people who have lived and worked in the land that became modern Israel. And I'm kind of beating that drum.